Okay, yeah, let's get started. A warm welcome to this second Jobs Wells Forum of 2026. My name is Joachim van der Meulen, and I'm the secretary for the Jobs Asia chapter and this Jobs Wells Forum. So today we're talking about the recommended guidelines for restricted access zones, which are commonly known as red zones. We will also do a hands-on demonstration of an open source AI monitoring solution, which you can adopt in your own operations at close to no cost. Before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsors for their kind and continuous support of the chapter. You'll see their logo below. So today we're mostly talking about the proposed draft for exposure zone management, which is the working title for the revision for the recommended guidelines for use of restricted access areas, or commonly known as red zones. Before I get into the draft itself, I want to explain how I became involved in this work. So Jobs Online in the UK had already started working on an update of the red zone management guidance. And I was asked to contribute specifically to the section on red zone monitoring using AI tools. So that makes sense because I have been working quite closely with monitoring technology and had a reasonable understanding of what these systems can and cannot do. I initially wrote that section in isolation without giving the rest of the document too much consideration. But when I was later asked whether I was comfortable with the overall direction of the draft, something did not quite feel right. At that stage, I could not really explain why. So that led me to go back into the topic in more details. So I started looking not just at the monitoring technology, but at how red zones are actually used, how exemptions are created, how access is authorized, and what technology reveals about the way work is really being performed. Out of that process, I agreed to try writing a draft from scratch, not as a competing document or an update, but as a way to test a different structure and a clearer argument. So far, the feedback from Jobs Online has been positive, but we both want to gather more feedback from our members before we even think of formalizing the document. So there are three observations that really added the most impact to shaping my thinking and the direction of this document. So, please pay attention here, because especially if you kind of feel that now it's you got it wrong, this is a wrong observation, then possibly it also means that a lot of the rest of the document is not correct. So yeah, bear with me and have a thought about what you think about that. So this picture was taken around 2013, no, in 2013, and this was just about a year after the recommended practice for red zone management was released. It was at a forum in Kuala Lumpur, and of course we discussed the topic extensively, but not everyone was convinced. So some rig managers accepted the idea of no-go zones and red zones, but their concern was practical. The work still had to be done on the drill floor. So in many cases, the guidance was implemented, but not fully absorbed. Red zones were established, access rules were written, and exemptions were created so people could still enter and complete the work. That may have reduced some uncontrolled exposure, but in many cases, the work itself continued much as before. It was now better documented, but not always fundamentally redesigned. That was my first insight. So they were essentially doing the same work, the same place, but now had the formal permission to do so. The next clue came when companies started trialing red zone monitoring tools. I think the first experiment started around 2015, and to my knowledge, Seadrill was one of the first to have a fully operating system in 2018 on a drill ship. At first, some companies reported that the systems were producing too many false alarms. And I initially took that at face value. But I looked more closely at how the technology worked and had a deeper conversation with people using it. And a different picture emerged. The technology was often detecting exactly what it was designed to detect: people in the red zone. The issue was that so many exemptions had been created that people were allowed to be there. The alarm was not always false. It was revealing how normal entry into the red zone had become. Bef- so that kind of was the second insight. So the final clue came from a KCA Deutag presentation late 2024 in this forum. They described a simple monitoring setup: a camera connected to an AI processor which controlled a traffic light. Before turning on the traffic light, they monitored the red zone and observed that out of every 60 minutes, the red zone was occupied by at least one personnel, approximately 48 minutes. They then told the crew the purpose of the camera and the traffic light. Before turning on the traffic light, the occupation rate dropped to 36 minutes. Once they turned on the traffic light and personnel could instantly see this turn red whenever somebody entered the red zone, the occupation rate dropped to 24 minutes. So without a major engineering change or redesigning work, and simply by making the exposure visible, the time spent in the red zone dropped from 48 minutes to 24 minutes. It halved. So even these 48 minutes had been permitted under the permit to work system, the reduction showed that not all of that exposure was truly necessary. So stay tuned, because later during the presentation, I'll be showcasing how you can set up such a monitoring system on your installation at almost no cost. So the proposed draft is built around the idea that we should challenge access before we authorize it. The first question is, before access, can entry be avoided? That means planning process should challenge the work method itself. Can the task be done differently? Can we use remote observation, tools, barriers, mechanization, a different sequence, or a different equipment state? Can we reduce the number of people exposed or time they need to spend inside the exposure zone? If entry is still necessary, then we move to the second question. During access, is entry properly controlled? At this point, authorization and access control are still very important. Entry should be deliberate, time-bound, clearly communicated, and controlled. People should understand why entry is necessary, what the limits are, what conditions must remain in place, and when work must stop. The third question is, after access, what does repeated entry teach us? This is where monitoring and review become valuable. If people keep entering the exposure zone, that should not simply result in repeated permission. It should trigger learning. Is there something about the work design, layout, supervision, tools, planning, or controls that is causing people to keep entering? So the aim is not just make entry more controlled. The aim is to reduce the need for entry in the first place. So the proposed draft is not moving away from the basic red zone concept. The underlying principle remains the same. Where there is an increased risk of dropped objects or other line of fire exposure, access should be restricted. That remains valid, and it remains important. What changes is the emphasis. The earlier red zone guidance was mainly organized how access should be administered. It covered things like restricted areas, area authorities, access diagrams, warning signs, permissions to enter, and controlling access to restricted areas. That was useful because it helped companies formalize access to hazardous areas and prevent uncontrolled entry. But the limitation is that if the main question becomes how do we give access, then entry can still become normal. The job may continue largely as before, except now entry is documented, permitted, and administered. The proposed draft builds on that foundation, but it gives greater emphasis to the question that should come first. Not only how do we control access, but first, is access needed? Before we authorize someone to enter, we should ask whether the work can be planned differently so that entry is avoided, reduced, shortened, or better controlled. So the shift is not away from red zone. The shift is toward a stronger management model behind it. Red zones still restricts access where exposure is elevated, but the new documents ask us to challenge the need for access before we focus on how to grant it. So let's have a look at the draft together. Most of you will, who will open the link, will see a little box in the top which shows you the ability to request access to the collaborative features of this application. This is currently available for a select group of focal points. Please fill up the form to request access. Please note that access to the discussion comment feature is only granted to Drops Asia chapter members. This publication is developed in collaboration with Drops Online. Its members will also be granted access, but will need to obtain permission through their respective focal points, or will need to nominate them through the Drops Online team administration. The reason for this is practical. We can only consider the views and opinions of our members. We assume that views and comments expressed in this forum and the publication are on behalf of your employer. We discourage anyone making statements or disclosing information that is not permitted by his or her employer. It is one of the reasons why we do not permit people to register with their private email address for these forums. Should there be any questions or comments made, we always have a way to channel this through a designated focal point with each member company. For comments from non-member companies, we have no way of escalating. So yeah, so this is the document. It really is a draft, and it's a working document, and it's really meant for you to give your feedback and engage with. So it has a function as mentioned, a discussion board whereby you can add your comments and make suggestions for improvements. These discussions, so the way to do that is you just open it up and you add your comment. So it's possible to do this both public and anonymously. I have to say though, I have access to who is posting. So it is recorded in the database with your name. You can go to the discussion board so you can see Alan has already added a few different comments here. And yeah, not many people have access yet. So yeah, do request access, and then you'll be able to add your comments as well. So yeah, obviously the document is way too long for us to go through in detail, but we have of course our preface, our introductions. We talk about some core principles here. We have our definitions. Probably there still can be done quite some work there. We have a exposure zone process, which probably we need to design some nice diagram for that. Yeah, and then this is kind of a more into identifying, classifying exposure zones. This is kind of mirrors very much the original red zone management booklet. All right. Yeah, then this goes into designing work to eliminate or reduce entry. And that's, of course, a kind of a more new concept. So we talk about standard equipment, standard positions, repeated exposure. Now, then it's, again, access rules, zone controls, also very similar to the original publication. Where possible, we didn't try to change the wording. Yeah, and then yeah, dynamic exposure zones. So we talk a lot about that things change. So the risk in a red zone is not constant, depending on different operations. The risk may be much higher. Um, so yeah, there's a chapter on automated monitoring and AI machine interaction. And I think there is one chapter which I like to talk about in details, which is about exposure metrics and improvement targets. Because the idea is if you are able to measure exactly how much time people are spending on in a red zone, you monitor this, you record this, and then you can start trying to reduce that number, right? And for that, I will show the red zone red zone monitoring application. Okay, so what we have here is an AI powered red zone monitoring tool. So you can see it's just hooked up to the camera on my laptop. So you draw a red zone. And so you can do, this is my camera on my computer, right? But you could do this also with a camera on your computer, and you can hook it up to um, the camera of your rig or whatever operation you have. So we say this becomes our red zone, and now we start monitoring. Right. So right now you see the traffic light is on green, and as I approach, it starts to turn yellow, and then when I enter it, it turns red. And so now we can see that it monitors somebody being in the red zone, and that is continuous measured until I go out, and then a no breach period starts. Okay, so what it does, it simply collects the data. So it exports the data, and it can give you a clear metric on how much time the red zone is being breached. So you can hook up this kind of technology. It is open sourced, so you can find it on our website. You can download it for free with the source code, and you can change that to suit your needs. So whatever. I think we've heard some great suggestions already just now. Immediately, these are things that you can change yourself and suit your own needs, and then start monitoring the activity on your rig. And that gives you a metric of, like, in an hour or in a full day, how much time are people spending in the red zone. And probably once you take that metric and say you start off with, out of every hour, it's 45 minutes. Now, if you then ask the question, well, how can we reduce this number? And you ask your crew, they probably find quite a few easy gains. 45 minutes is still quite a lot, but any reduction that you can get here is a good improvement, because any time that people are not in the exposure zone is a reduced chance of them being hurt should a drops incidents happen. So that's what this technology is about. I know a lot of people are experimenting with this technology. The idea is often having to spend expensive cameras, sensors, trackers, and all that definitely makes the technology better. But in its basis, you can try this out with your existing hardware, and start tracking this on your rig.